Your clients stay with the firm, Victor, but your badge is deactivated as of 5 p.m., Julian sneered, sliding a $0 severance release across the mahogany conference table. I didn't raise my voice. I simply signed the paper, walked out, and dialed Apex Health's general counsel to trigger Clause 14B. To understand how a 34-year-old executive destroyed a $54 million corporate enterprise in less than 72 hours, you have to go back 15 years. I joined Thorn Enterprise Solutions back in 2011 when we were operating out of a cramped three-room suite in downtown Chicago. At 52 years old today, I've spent the better part of my adult life building this firm's enterprise client division from the ground up. I brought in our very first healthcare network client, secured our data compliance infrastructure, and negotiated every multi-year master service agreement that kept the lights on. When I started, the founder, Gerald Thorne, was a pragmatic businessman who understood one basic law of commerce: relationships drive revenue. Gerald knew that corporate clients don't sign $40 million retainers with a glowing brand logo. They sign contracts with the specific leaders they trust. Over 15 years, I personally courted, secured, and managed our crown jewel account, Apex Health, a regional medical network spanning 32 hospitals and over 400 outpatient clinics. By early 2026, Apex Health represented $42 million in annual recurring revenue. That single account accounted for nearly 78% of Thorn Enterprise Solutions' total gross income. The remaining 22% was scattered across small, low-margin regional contracts that barely covered operational overhead. In every meaningful sense, Apex Health was the blood supply of the entire company. 5 years ago, back in 2021, when Apex Health was preparing to sign a massive decade-long software and logistics management extension, their executive board expressed deep concern. They were worried about corporate instability. Gerald Thorne was already in his early 60s, and the industry was whispering about potential private equity buyouts or aggressive hostile takeovers. Apex Health CEO Richard Vance, no relation to me, though we shared a last name, made a non-negotiable demand during contract negotiations. He stated plainly that Apex Health would only tie its operational infrastructure to Thorn Enterprise Solutions if I was legally bound to supervise the account. Gerald Thorne knew he couldn't afford to lose Apex Health. To lock in the deal, Gerald's legal team structured a specialized commercial arrangement. We drafted the Enterprise Portfolio Assignment deed under Delaware Corporate Code, Section 18-407. Under this structure, the master service agreements were not directly owned by Thorn Enterprise Solutions as standard internal work product. Instead, the contract rights were assigned through my independent asset entity, Vance Advisory LLC, and licensed exclusively to Thorn Enterprise Solutions. The contract contained Clause 14B, a strict keyman performance covenant. It stated that the exclusive license for Thorn Enterprise Solutions to bill and service the $42 million Apex Health portfolio was contingent upon my active executive employment as managing director. Furthermore, the clause explicitly stipulated that if my employment was terminated without cause, or if the company defaulted on earned portfolio commissions, the exclusive licensing assignment would immediately revoke after a 48-hour cure window, reverting all master account servicing rights directly back to Vance Advisory LLC. Gerald signed it, I signed it, and Apex Health's board signed it. It sat quietly in the corporate vault for 5 years. An invisible insurance policy protecting the work I had spent a decade establishing. Everything changed 3 months ago, when Gerald Thorne announced his formal retirement at age 68. Instead of appointing a seasoned corporate officer from the executive committee, Gerald yielded to family pressure and handed the chief executive officer title to his 34-year-old son, Julian Thorne. Julian was a textbook product of unearned privilege. He possessed an advanced business degree from a prestigious university, a complete lack of real-world operational experience, and an insatiable desire to prove that his father's old-school corporate philosophy was obsolete. Julian arrived at the headquarters with an entourage of young, aggressive consultants who talked constantly about optimizing margins, slashing legacy leadership, and disrupting traditional commission structures. Within 2 weeks of taking the corner office, Julian appointed his college fraternity brother, Nathan Miller, a 31-year-old former junior analyst with zero experience in healthcare enterprise accounts, as senior vice president of corporate growth. Julian and Nathan immediately set their sights on the sales commission structure. Last quarter, after 14 months of exhausting, round-the-clock legal and operational reviews, I successfully finalized the 5-year master extension with Apex Health. The extension guaranteed $42 million in annual recurring revenue through 2031. Under my executive compensation agreement, which had been approved by the board 5 years prior, closing this specific multi-year renewal entitled me to a 7% portfolio performance bonus, paid out upon execution of the contract. Mathematically, that bonus came out to exactly $3,800,000. The payout was scheduled for the end of the second quarter, but Julian Thorne had no intention of letting nearly $4 million leave the corporate bank accounts to pay a 52-year-old director he viewed as part of the old guard. To Julian and Nathan, $3.8 million wasn't an earned contractual obligation. It was a pool of capital that could be absorbed to inflate the company's net operating income before the annual shareholder meeting. Julian genuinely believed that because the contract bore the company name on the cover page, the client belonged entirely to the firm and that I was merely an expensive, easily replaced manager holding a pencil. In the weeks leading up to the end of June, I noticed the subtle shifts in corporate behavior. Access permissions to high-level financial reporting modules were slowly restricted. Emails to the board regarding my bonus payout went unanswered or were returned with vague administrative deferrals from Julian's administrative assistant. Nathan Miller began showing up unannounced to my routine client check-ins with Apex Health's procurement team, attempting to insert himself into high-level operational discussions while making condescending remarks about streamlining legacy management. I didn't argue, nor did I throw tantrums in executive hallways. I quietly gathered every original executed copy of the 2021 Enterprise Portfolio Assignment Deed, verified the active status of Vance Advisory LLC with the Delaware Division of Corporations, and placed my personal legal counsel on high alert. Julian Thorne believed he was playing a sophisticated game of corporate strategy. He had no idea he was standing on top of a dormant volcano, holding a match. On Friday morning at 9 o'clock, I received a calendar invitation for an urgent alignment meeting in the executive boardroom on the 42nd floor. The meeting had no agenda attached, but I already knew what was coming. I packed my leather briefcase, walked past the open-plan cubicles, where junior analysts were busy plugging numbers into spreadsheets, and stepped into the glass-walled conference room. Julian Thorne was seated at the head of the long mahogany table, wearing a tailored designer suit that looked like it belonged on a fashion runway rather than in an operational enterprise setting. To his right sat 31-year-old Nathan Miller, holding an iPad and trying hard to look authoritative. To Julian's left was our human resources director, looking distinctly uncomfortable with her eyes glued to a manila folder in front of her. Julian didn't ask me to sit down. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossed his arms, and adjusted his designer watch. "Victor, thanks for coming up," Julian began, his voice dripping with forced corporate warmth. "We've been conducting a comprehensive review of our executive overhead and portfolio structures over the past quarter. As part of our modernization strategy, we're restructuring our enterprise client accounts to remove legacy redundancies." I stood calmly at the edge of the table, holding my briefcase by my side. "Redundancies, Julian?" Julian picked up a single sheet of paper from the table. "To be direct, Victor, your executive compensation package is completely out of alignment with current market benchmarks. You're asking for a $3.8 million portfolio performance bonus for the Apex Health renewal. Frankly, that figure is absurd. Apex Health renewed because of Thorne Enterprise Solutions' brand reputation, our technology stack, and our market presence, not because one senior manager attended quarterly dinners." Nathan Miller chimed in, trying to match Julian's arrogant tone. "We've audited the account history, Victor. You've been managing Apex Health with an antiquated, hands-on approach that inflates operational costs." Modern enterprise accounts require agile, scalable leadership. The company cannot justify paying out nearly $4 million in cash reserves to an individual employee when that capital is needed to fuel our tech expansion. I looked at Nathan, then back at Julian. That $3.8 million bonus was negotiated, approved by the board of directors, and written into my binding executive agreement 5 years ago, when we secured the 10-year master service framework. I delivered $42 million in guaranteed annual recurring revenue through 2031. The bonus is legally earned, Julian scoffed, a condescending smirk spreading across his face. That agreement was signed by my father in a different economic era. Times have changed, Victor. We are giving you a choice today. You can accept a revised bonus structure of $200,000, payable over 24 months contingent on strict non-compete metrics, or we can terminate our executive relationship effective immediately. And if I decline the $200,000 offer? I asked quietly. Julian tapped his pen against the mahogany table. Then we terminate your employment for cause, citing insubordination and failure to meet updated corporate margin directives. If you're terminated for cause, you forfeit all accrued bonus claims, all unvested equity, and all severance entitlements. He slid a 4-page document across the table toward me. It was a standard corporate separation release form. The financial line item for severance payout was stamped with a clear figure, $0. Nathan here will be stepping in as the Senior Vice President in charge of the Apex Health portfolio, effective immediately, Julian added, leaning forward with an arrogant smile. He'll be taking over all client relationships, handling the quarterly reviews, and managing the account. You have until 5 p.m. today to turn in your corporate keys, your laptop, and your security badge. Security will escort you from the premises. I looked down at the document. Julian believed he had backed me into a corner. He assumed that a 52-year-old corporate veteran would panic at the prospect of losing his salary, succumb to the pressure, sign the release form, and walk away with scraps rather than fight a multi-million-dollar corporate legal machine. He had no idea that he had just handed me the exact legal catalyst required to trigger Clause 14B. Without saying a word, I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a pen, and turned to the final signature page of the notice of termination. I carefully lined through the clause that attempted to waive accrued compensation rights, wrote, "Received for notice only. Rights reserved under Delaware law," next to my signature, and signed the document. Julian frowned, looking at the line I had drawn through the waiver clause. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I acknowledge receipt of your termination notice," I replied smoothly, recapping my pen and sliding the paper back across the table. "You have made your decision, Julian. I will respect it. Glad to hear you're being reasonable." Julian sneered, clearly misinterpreting my composure as defeat. "Hand over your badge to HR before you leave." "Understood," I said. I turned around and walked out of the executive boardroom. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice or exchange hostile glances with colleagues in the hallway. I walked back down to my office on the 38th floor, opened my filing cabinet, and took out my personal notebook containing direct client phone numbers and original contract filings. I packed my personal desk items into a single leather bag. A family photograph, a vintage fountain pen given to me by Gerald Thorne 10 years ago, and my personal hard drive containing independent consulting archives. At 4:45 p.m., I placed my corporate laptop, cell phone, and building access badge neatly on the desk. As I walked out of the building into the cool Friday evening air of Chicago, Nathan Miller was already sitting in my former office, boasting loudly on his phone about his new $42 million account. I pulled out my personal phone, unlocked the screen, and placed a direct call to Richard Vance, the Chief Executive Officer and General Counsel of Apex Health. "Victor?" Richard answered on the second ring. "I was expecting your call regarding next Tuesday's quarterly operational review." "Richard," I said calmly, standing on the sidewalk outside the corporate tower, "I'm calling to inform you that as of 5 p.m. today, Julian Thorne has terminated my employment with Thorne Enterprise Solutions and formally defaulted on my key man portfolio agreement." There was a silence on the other end of the line for 3 long seconds. "He did what?" Richard's voice dropped an octave. turning deadly serious. He terminated my contract and denied the earned performance bonus, I continued. As per Section 14B of the 2021 Enterprise Portfolio Assignment Deed, Thorn Enterprise Solutions' exclusive servicing license for Apex Health is now subject to immediate revocation. I am formally issuing the 48-hour cure notice to their legal team tonight. As of 9 a.m. on Monday morning, Thorn Enterprise Solutions will no longer possess the legal right to bill, service, or access your network infrastructure. Richard let out a low, cold laugh. Julian Thorn just signed his own death warrant. Send me the formal affidavit tonight, Victor. My legal team will meet you in your counsel's office at 8 a.m. on Monday. I ended the call, placed my phone back in my pocket, and walked toward the train station. The weekend had just begun. Over the weekend, while Julian Thorn was undoubtedly celebrating at upscale steakhouses, with Nathan Miller and bragging about his bold corporate cost-cutting measures, I was sitting in the high-rise office of my lead contract attorney, Lawrence Cole. Lawrence was a 60-year-old veteran of corporate litigation who had handled complex Delaware entity restructurings for 30 years. He reviewed the original 2021 Enterprise Portfolio Assignment Deed, the signed 2026 Apex Health Extension, and the written notice of termination Julian had handed me on Friday morning. "This is breathtakingly arrogant," Lawrence said, laying down his reading glasses and shaking his head. Julian Thorn didn't just fire an executive. He severed the master license that grants his company the legal standing to service 78% of their total business. Did their in-house legal counsel even look at Clause 14B before signing off on your termination? Julian didn't consult in-house counsel, I replied calmly, sipping black coffee. He bypassed the corporate legal department entirely. He framed my termination as an administrative cost reduction measure within his executive authority. He genuinely believes that contract assignments automatically belong to the corporate entity, regardless of key man provisions. Lawrence smiled warmly. Then he's about to receive a masterclass in Delaware commercial jurisprudence. By Saturday afternoon, Lawrence and his team had prepared a bulletproof legal filing package. The primary document was a formal notice of material default, contract breach, and irrevocable license termination served under Delaware Code Title VI, Section 18-407. The notice outlined three specific, unassailable points of law. First, that Thorn Enterprise Solutions servicing rights over the Apex Health account were strictly derivative, operating under a conditional portfolio assignment from Vance Advisory, LLC. Second, that Julian Thorn's deliberate withholding of the $3.8 million portfolio performance bonus constituted a material default of the master agreement. Third, that under Clause 14B, the default triggered an automatic 48-hour cure window, at the expiration of which all client servicing rights, billing permissions, and operational delegative authority reverted directly to Vance Advisory, LLC. Furthermore, Lawrence highlighted Section 14B's liquidated damages covenant. If Thorn Enterprise Solutions attempted to retain or illegally service the Apex Health account post-revocation, they would incur an immediate statutory penalty equal to 30% of the gross 5-year contract value, an additional $12,600,000 in enforceable debt owed directly to Vance Advisory, LLC. At 3 p.m. on Sunday, a certified legal process server delivered the physical filing package directly to Thorn Enterprise Solutions corporate headquarters and to Julian Thorn's private residence in downtown Chicago. Simultaneously, Richard Vance convened an emergency virtual session of Apex Health's executive board and legal committee on Sunday evening. As CEO of a $42 million healthcare client, Richard had zero interest in allowing an inexperienced 31-year-old frat brother like Nathan Miller to handle their critical data infrastructure. Under the provisions of their master contract with Vance Advisory, LLC, Apex Health held a reciprocal keyman clause. If Victor Vance was no longer managing the account at Thorn Enterprise Solutions, Apex Health possessed the immediate legal right to rescind their vendor agreement without incurring any termination penalties. During the emergency Sunday night meeting, Apex Health's board voted unanimously to terminate their master service agreement with Thorn Enterprise Solutions, effective immediately at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. They executed a brand new, direct 5-year portfolio management contract with my newly activated corporate entity, Vance Portfolio Partners, LLC. To ensure complete operational protection, Apex Health's Chief Information Security Officer immediately revoked all digital access credentials, API security tokens, and administrative gateway keys previously issued to Thorn Enterprise Solutions' technical team. As midnight approached on Sunday night, the trap was fully armed. Julian Thorn went to sleep believing he had saved his company $3.8 million in executive bonus expenses. In reality, he was waking up to a Monday morning where his company possessed zero legal authority to touch their largest client, zero access to their primary revenue engine, and an impending $12.6 million breach liability. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. on Monday morning, put on a sharp charcoal suit, and drove to downtown Chicago. I wasn't going to Thorn Enterprise Solutions. Instead, I walked into the newly leased temporary executive suite of Vance Portfolio Partners, LLC, located just 2 blocks away on South LaSalle Street. By 7:30 a.m., my former senior operational team from Thorn Enterprise Solutions, 3 senior client managers, and 2 enterprise systems architects who had worked with me for over 8 years, arrived at my new office. They had resigned from Thorn Enterprise Solutions late Friday evening after learning of my firing, and I had immediately hired them with 30% salary increases, backed by Vance Portfolio Partners' new contract terms. At precisely 8 o'clock on Monday morning, the 48-hour legal cure window under Clause 14B officially expired. The master servicing license was legally dead. At 8:15 a.m., Lawrence Cole transmitted the finalized notice of license revocation and cease and desist order via encrypted electronic delivery to Julian Thorn, the board of directors of Thorn Enterprise Solutions, and their corporate bank lenders. The legal kill switch had been pulled. Now, all that was left was to watch the dominoes fall. At 8:30 on Monday morning, Julian Thorn walked into his executive suite at Thorn Enterprise Solutions, holding an artisanal espresso and feeling like the undisputed master of corporate efficiency. He had scheduled a 10 o'clock briefing with his father's old board of directors to brag about cutting nearly $4 million in executive bonus expenses and reassigning the firm's top client to his personal protege, Nathan Miller. At 8:45 a.m., Nathan Miller sat down at his newly inherited desk in my former office, opened his corporate laptop, and attempted to log into the Apex Health Enterprise Management portal to process the monthly $3.5 million billing cycle. A bright red alert box flashed across his screen. Access denied. Error 403. Security credentials revoked by Master Enterprise Administrator. Nathan tried 3 more times, assuming it was a routine network glitch. He called the internal IT help desk, but the IT director informed him that the server credentials had not been disabled internally. They had been severed at the root API gateway level by Apex Health's cybersecurity team. Before Nathan could process what was happening, his desk phone rang. It was the chief procurement officer of Apex Health. "Nathan," the voice on the line said coldly, "we are calling to provide formal verbal confirmation that as of 8 a.m. today, Apex Health has terminated all commercial relationships with Thorn Enterprise Solutions. Written notice was delivered to your legal department 15 minutes ago. You are instructed to immediately cease all attempts to access our systems. Any further attempt by your staff to touch our data architecture will be treated as an unauthorized breach under federal computer security laws." Nathan dropped his phone, his face turning pale. He scrambled out of his chair and sprinted down the executive corridor, bursting into Julian Thorn's corner office without knocking. "Julian, we have a massive emergency," Nathan stammered, breathing heavily. "Apex Health just shut down our API access. Their procurement officer called. They said our contract is terminated." Julian spun around in his leather chair, scowling. "What are you talking about? Contracts don't just get terminated on a Monday morning. Call their legal team. Tell them there's an administrative misunderstanding." Before Nathan could reply, Julian's computer chimed with a high-priority email alert from Thorn Enterprise Solutions General Counsel. Attached to the email was the formal filing package delivered by Lawrence Cole, alongside a separate letter from First Commercial Bank, the lead financial institution providing Thorn Enterprise Solutions' $30 million revolving credit facility. The bank's letter was blunt and devastating. The credit facility agreement contained a strict debt covenant specifying that if Thorn Enterprise Solutions lost accounts representing more than 20% of its gross annual recurring revenue, the bank held the right to declare an immediate technical default. Since Apex Health represented 78% of the firm's revenue, First Commercial Bank had frozen the company's operating accounts, locked their payroll processing channels, and demanded an immediate debt audit within 24 hours. Julian's hands began to shake as he opened the filing from Lawrence Cole. For the first time, he read the full text of Clause 14B of the 2021 Enterprise Portfolio Assignment Deed. He stared at the signature line where his father, Gerald Thorne, had legally bound the company to the key man assignment provisions. He looked at the liquidated damages clause, requiring an immediate $12.6 million cash penalty for unauthorized contract retention. The realization hit Julian like a sledgehammer. He hadn't saved the company $3.8 million. He had vaporized $42 million in annual revenue, triggered $30 million in immediate bank debt default, and exposed the firm to $12.6 million in statutory penalties. All because of his arrogant desire to rob a senior director of his earned commission. Between 9:15 and 10 o'clock a.m., my personal cell phone lit up repeatedly. Julian Thorne called me 14 times in 45 minutes. Text messages flooded in, shifting rapidly from furious corporate threats to desperate pleas for a meeting. I let every call go to voicemail. I sat at my new desk at Vance Portfolio Partners, enjoying a hot cup of coffee while reviewing the initial setup of Apex Health's new account portal with my team. At 10:15 a.m., when the phone rang for the 15th time, I picked up the receiver and answered smoothly. "Victor Vance! Victor! Thank God you picked up!" Julian's voice was hysterical, stripped of every ounce of his previous executive swagger. "Victor, we have a catastrophic misunderstanding here. Apex Health locked our system access, and the bank is freezing our operational lines. You need to call Richard Vance right now and tell him to restore the servicing license." "There is no misunderstanding, Julian," I said calmly. "You made a calculated business decision on Friday morning. You terminated my executive contract for cause, defaulted on my earned bonus, and claimed my portfolio belonged to your corporate entity. Under Clause 14B in Delaware Code, Section 18-407, your servicing license expired at 8 a.m. today. The account has reverted to Vance Portfolio Partners." "You can't do this!" Julian screamed into the phone. "This is corporate sabotage. I will sue you for breach of fiduciary duty. I'll file an injunction and tie you up in court for 10 years. "You are welcome to try, Julian," I replied evenly. "However, while you wait for a court hearing, your bank credit facility is frozen. Your Friday payroll of $600,000 will bounce, and your board of directors is currently receiving emergency notification letters from Lawrence Cole detailing your personal breach of corporate governance duty." There was a long, suffocating silence on the line. I could hear Julian breathing heavily, struggling to grasp the total collapse of his authority. "What do you want, Victor?" Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't want anything from you, Julian," I said. "But if your board of directors wants to save Thorn Enterprise Solutions from entering involuntary Chapter 11 bankruptcy by the end of the week, I suggest you and the board members arrive at Lawrence Cole's law office at 2 p.m. sharp today. If you are 1 minute late, the settlement terms double." I hung up the phone without waiting for an answer. The stage was set for the final boardroom showdown. At 1:55 p.m., I sat in the main conference room of Lawrence Cole's law office, overlooking the Chicago skyline. At precisely 2 o'clock, the heavy oak doors opened, and the delegation from Thorn Enterprise Solutions walked in. Leading the group was not Julian Thorne, but his 68-year-old father, Gerald Thorne. Gerald looked pale and visibly aged, his posture bowed by the humiliating reality of what his son had accomplished in less than 3 months. Behind Gerald walked the 4 members of the company's executive board, their faces grim and stone-cold. Bringing up the rear was Julian Thorne, looking like a shattered man, his eyes fixed on the floor. Noticeably absent was Nathan Miller. The board had held an emergency executive session at noon, during which Nathan was summarily fired and escorted from the building without severance. Gerald Thorne walked directly to my side of the table. He didn't look at his legal counsel. He looked straight at me. "Victor," Gerald said, his voice quiet and heavy with emotion. "I owe you a profound apology. I built that company with you for 15 years. I trusted you with our biggest clients, and you delivered every single time. Allowing my son to step into the CEO chair without proper oversight was the greatest mistake of my professional life." "I appreciate your words, Gerald," I replied calmly. "You and I built a great enterprise. But your son chose to turn a legal compensation obligation into a hostile personal battle." Gerald nodded slowly, taking a seat at the table. He turned a furious glare toward Julian, who shrank back into his chair. "Let's resolve this before the bank initiates receivership." Lawrence Cole stepped forward, placing a 5-page master settlement and transition agreement in front of Gerald and the board. The terms for avoiding immediate federal litigation, bank default enforcement, and public receivership are non-negotiable, Lawrence announced firm and clear. First, Lawrence stated, Thorne Enterprise Solutions will immediately disburse $5 million to Vance Portfolio Partners, LLC. This covers Mr. Vance's original earned portfolio bonus of $3.8 million, plus $1.2 million in statutory interest and legal fee indemnification. The payment must be executed via wire transfer before 4 p.m. today. Second, Thorne Enterprise Solutions will execute a complete legal release of all non-compete covenants, non-solicitation restrictions, and intellectual property claims regarding the Apex Health account and all associated Keyman clients. Third, Thorne Enterprise Solutions will execute an asset sale agreement transferring its core data center hardware and specialized client service facilities to Vance Portfolio Partners for $4,500,000, a distress valuation that will allow your company to satisfy First Commercial Bank's immediate debt liquidity requirements. Fourth, Lawrence concluded, looking directly at Julian. Julian Thorne will formally resign from his position as Chief Executive Officer, surrender all executive authority, and be barred from holding an officer or director position within the company moving forward. A trustee appointed by the board and approved by First Commercial Bank will assume operational control. Julian looked up, his face flushed with panic. "Dad, you can't let them do this. You're stripping me of everything. We can fight this in bankruptcy court." Gerald Thorne slammed his hand onto the table, the sharp crack echoing through the room. "Silence!" Gerald barked, his eyes flashing with rage. "You destroyed a $54 million company in 72 hours because of your bloated ego and your incompetence. You didn't read the contracts. You didn't respect the men who built this firm, and you almost put 300 employees on the street. You are done, Julian." Gerald picked up a pen from the table. Without another word of hesitation, he signed his name on every signature line of the settlement agreement. The 4 board members immediately followed, signing their authorization approvals. Finally, Gerald shoved the executive resignation form in front of Julian. With trembling hands and tears of humiliation in his eyes, Julian signed his resignation. By 3:45 p.m., the bank wire confirmation landed in Vance Portfolio Partners' corporate account. $5 million cleared. The physical infrastructure transfer documents were stamped by process servers. And the bank released the emergency freeze on Thorne Enterprise Solutions' remaining accounts, allowing them to pay their general staff while downsizing into a minor subcontracting vendor. The following morning, Apex Health officially launched its expanded enterprise operations under Vance Portfolio Partners, LLC. Over 90% of Thorne Enterprise Solutions' former client service team transitioned over to our new firm, eager to work under leadership that valued integrity, operational excellence, and contract law. Over the next 6 months, Vance Portfolio Partners grew rapidly, securing 2 additional regional hospital networks and pushing our annual recurring portfolio past $65 million. Thorne Enterprise Solutions survived, but only as a quiet, secondary service provider stripped of its high-margin crown jewels, operating under strict bank oversight. Julian Thorne left Chicago entirely, his corporate reputation in tatters after industry circles learned how his arrogance liquidated his family's legacy. Sitting in my new corner office on South LaSalle Street, looking out at the sun setting over the Chicago skyline, I often reflect on that Friday morning in the boardroom. Julian thought he was demonstrating strength by flexing executive authority, tearing up agreements, and trying to intimidate a veteran director. But in the modern corporate world, true power doesn't come from a fancy title printed on a door or a family name on a building. True power comes from competence, absolute control over operational reality, and knowing that when you build something of value, you always make sure the foundation is legally unassailable. Julian learned that lesson the hard way. And I got every single dollar I earned.